All right, so the panel is live now. And hello, everyone. My name is Ranjit Anipul, co-founder of Be Waste Wise. And first of all, thank you very much for joining us today. You can send your comments or suggestions by using the live chat window on our website at wastewise.be, or you can also tweet to us at bewastewise on Twitter. And today's panel is about short-lived climate pollutants. And when we look at waste management and climate change, waste management only contributes up to 5% of climate change. But when we add a co-benefit of public health, all of a sudden climate change becomes more important because open burning of waste and landfill fires emit black carbon, which also contributes to public health damage. And further to this, when we look at the increasing awareness about climate change being a problem of today and not of a distant future, the role and potential of short-lived climate pollutants like methane and black carbon in mitigating climate change increases further. And to get us through this topic, we actually have two of the best people in waste. And let me start with Dr. Nimmi Damodaran. She is the Vice President of Stratus Consulting, and today this panel is to a good extent based on one of our presentations on short-lived climate pollutants. And we also have Mr. Gary Crawford. He is the Vice President of Emerging Markets of Veolia, and he's the chair of a working group on waste management and climate change at the International Solid Waste Association, ISWA. So I'll let the panelists talk more about themselves and also make a point about the topic. And let's start with Dr. Nimmi Damodaran. Nimmi?
Hello. I thank you, Ranjit. I'm a vice president at Stratus Consulting. We are an environmental policy firm and usually work with the U.S. government as well as international multilateral aid organizations as well. My work has been predominantly in the arena of climate change, and lately most of my work has been in the area of short-lived climate pollutants. And the pollutants that
all right.
Now are black. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Black carbon and methane, and both in the solid waste, right now working both in the solid waste area as well as in the brick sector. In the solid waste area, we are looking at the life cycle of waste management from collection to disposal, with collection, recycling, organics waste management, the entire cycle of waste management. And the work we are doing focuses on what are the emissions both of black carbon and methane. And then, for instance, if we have open burning, we have black carbon, basically particles that people commonly refer to as soot, but it's essentially elemental carbon. And then if you look at transportation, particular diesel, you have black carbon emissions again, as you see the coming off of fuel collection trucks. And there's also methane from the landfills. At every stage, we are concerned about the short-lived climate pollution. And some of the work, and most of my work has been, especially all of my work on the solid waste sector right now, is being funded by the US EPA. And Gary will probably talk more about the climate and clean initiative, and that is the basis of the work that we are doing. And we are working right now in about 6 cities, including Accra in Ghana, Addis Ababa in Ethiopia, Amman in Jordan, Dhaka in Bangladesh, Jakarta in Indonesia, and in Rio in Brazil. And what is really interesting is as we work across these different cities, we can apply the lessons that we find that these cities are in different stages of waste management. And so we can even apply lessons learned in one city to what is another city facing. And I was saying to Ranjit earlier that we are talking here and as well as in the international forums about climate change and the importance of mitigating these short-lived climate pollutants for the reason of climate change. But what we find um, water quality, air quality, we have much more traction in the cities because those are what sometimes challenges that we face. So we can have enormous benefits when we do that. And the one other point I want to make, something that is scary, is that for us it's very important to have a champion in the city. We find that we're more successful in cities when there is a local champion who has a year of the municipality, or either they are in the municipality or have a year of the municipality, and we find more success. I think something that's my
Thank you, Nimmi. Gary, would you like to go now?
Sure. And I'd like to start off by thanking you for the invitation to join this webinar. I'm pleased to be joining Nimmi and talking about this subject that we've worked together on several times and together in a working for the Climate and Clean Air Coalition, which I'll talk about some more later in the call or at the end of this discussion. So, as you said, I work for Veolia. Veolia is really the global leader in optimized resource management. What we do is we have over 200,000 professionals dedicated to designing and implementing the best possible solutions for local management of essential resources. And this is water, energy, and raw materials. So we are working in these subjects. We've been working in waste management subjects for a number of years, and we know that the emissions from our landfill facilities, for example, are a significant source of methane. We're aware of the concerns with black carbon from waste activities. So as a result, we were also we saw that there are a number of benefits that the waste sector can bring just by implementing some actions and improved waste management practices. And so we see that that is a really essentially a cost-effective solution for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So we'll talk about that some more, I'm sure, in the minutes ahead. But what we saw is that this is really an important area, and we have the waste sector has a very strong message that there is some low-hanging, middle-hanging fruit that we should be going after, because it is cost-effective solutions that also bring environmental and health benefits. That's why we're really promoting that, and that's why we created a task force and then a working group on waste management and climate change in ISWA. And as a result of that, we worked with UNEP, and we're actually invited to be a lead partner in the Climate and Clean Air Coalition, which brought together a number of like-minded associations, countries. Actually, I should name those first. A number of the countries that are involved and different associations that were working on this subject came together and really joined forces to really work to provide technical advice and support to the cities, because we decided that we would start at the city level. So it's a subject that's very interesting for me, for my company, for the coalition that we're working under, and I'm pleased to be on this call.
All right, thank you very much. And just to start with a very easy introduction, can one of you go answer which are the largest sources of black carbon? We know that landfills are the largest sources of methane, but for black carbon, what are the largest sources in developing countries and developed countries? Would one of you like to take that question?
Well, well, Nimmi, why don't you, do you want to take that one? I know you've answered that one before.
So when we look at black carbon, the four sources we focus on are like domestic residential sources, and oftentimes, and I'm talking about global rather than like differentiating between developing and developed, and that has to do with cook stove, use of cook, burning coal or biomass cook stove. And then there are industrial emissions, and there often you do find a difference because if there are major pollution control regulations in the developed countries, then you have less there, and in developing countries you can see more emissions from industrial, especially when you have the quality and prices that fall into within the sector that is not yet regulated very much. And then another major source, are developing in the transportation sector near climate and then especially when diesel is being burned. And the last category is open biomass burning. And open biomass burning, it includes not just like your waste being burned, it also includes forest fires, agricultural burning, handling, that. So that those are matter. And there is not a clear understanding as to what portion of that open biomass burning constitutes or what portion waste management or open burning waste constitutes the open uh, burning itself. So that is something we're trying to get ahead.
That is interesting.
In the waste sector, it is really difficult is when we talk to municipalities, we have a pretty good sense of what they are collecting.
Right.
We don't have a what is being generated because what is being generated, if it's not collected, oftentimes you see like roadside burning of waste, and it's really hard to get a handle on.
Right. Yeah. There was actually a study in India which said that about 10% of waste in landfills get burnt, or open dump sites gets burnt, or about 2% from open streets. But of course, there are no, easy methods to exactly figure that out, that percentage out. Right. And
I probably talk to the open burning at dump sites, what causes it. And
Nimmi, did you say you want to talk about it, or?
no, I said Gary probably talk about like what happens at open dump sites when it's not managed properly, how fires happen.
Right. Do you want to talk about it?
Gary.
Gary. Yeah.
Okay. Well, certainly, I would say that's a significant, and probably when we talk about what should be really some of the short-term actions that should be taken, or targets that set objectives in some of the developing countries, is really to eliminate the open burning at open dumps where there's open burning. The significant health concerns with that, and should really be seeking some other solutions. So I would say that that is really one of the more critical elements of actions that can be taken.
Right.
Go ahead.
Okay. No, I was just asking the next question. I thought you were done, but please go ahead.
No, I'm done. I'm done. That's fine.
Okay. All right. So since we're about to talk about solutions, I wanted to start, and Nimmi has a global perspective on working. Both of you have a global perspective. I wanted to start with what kind of international support is available for developing countries for waste management, at least to eliminate open burning, like you said.
Okay. Well, in terms of what kind of international support, there's I'll bring back up the fact that there are a number of different institutions and agencies and development banks that are interested in working towards improved waste management practices. And it can cover everything from stopping the open burning right on through to finding more suitable solutions and technologies that are adapted to the city's needs. But of course that takes finance. But before we get to that, what I'd just like to say that in order to get to that point and really analyze and evaluate what are the best solutions, in the CCAC, what we've decided, we've taken an approach, as I mentioned earlier, to really work and focus on the cities. And with the city work, what we set up, once we have cities that enter into the program, what happens is there's first an assessment that's done. So really evaluate what are the waste flows, how's it currently being treated or mistreated or not treated, and what can be done, and taking a look at it and trying to get a sense of what the volumes are, how the whole picture of what's happening within the city. That city assessment data is then reviewed and analyzed with the city officials and their technical experts to really try to work and come up with an action plan. And this action plan will really define what are the measures that need to be taken over a planning period. Of course, it can't be done overnight, but at least setting out a plan. And that plan, what we're now working towards, is making sure that it even goes forward further than that, and looking at it and coming up with some guidance along with the technical assistance from the CCAC partners, but also coming in with some solutions and looking to develop a bankable project. How can they then put the project together in a way that can go in front of a development bank or other banks and other investors to really seek finance for these projects? Because it's not so easy to do that, especially if it's the first of its kind in a country or region.
Interesting. Nimmi, do you have something to say about that?
Yeah, so I would say, so Gary mentioned the multilateral aid agencies. So what we're finding is that there are definitely organizations such as the World Bank that looks across all countries. Then you have the Asian Development Bank, the African Development Bank, the Inter-American Development Bank. So all of these banks are also looking at projects with the countries, but then they end up going through the national governments. And sometimes they do the technical studies, and sometimes they work with the governments to enable financing. Another source of financing, I think, we also are encountering, like for instance, situations where there are individual country aid agencies that are assisting. So Japan, for instance, JICA is assisting Dhaka, and they're actually providing them with compacting trucks. So you find instances like that. And then we are also finding situations like in India, you have the JNNURM funding the Jawaharlal Nehru Urban Renewal Fund, I believe. I'm not sure I'm correct with the acronym, but there are sources
It'll be
of
changed
funding.
soon.
Yeah, within the country itself, sometimes the municipalities are not aware about the sources of funding right in the country. So it's, that's the other thing where I think it would be increased awareness of such sources of funding would be useful.
That is interesting. Let me just remind the viewers that since we not have Dan Hoornweg, Professor Dan Hoornweg on the panel, we decided that this panel will only be for 30 minutes, which means we have only 9 minutes left. Therefore, I'll jump questions really quick. And a question to one of you, which is, what is a reasonable short-lived climate pollutants emission reduction goal? I know there's still studies going on, but what would be a reasonable one?
Well, I'll try to answer that. I mean, in terms of what are the reduction, it may not be exactly what you were looking for, but in terms of a reduction goal, I mean, rather than trying to quantify or give a percentage or give a total, what I would say is that, again, I would go back to what the key would be is to, at a minimum, really work to ban open burning of waste and set that as a goal to really avoid the burning of waste and replacing it with suitable technologies. That's a first step.
That would be that would need increasing or optimizing collection systems and of course other technologies at the disposal end, I guess. Exactly.
I mean, it would be moving into really more sound, environmentally sound waste practices, starting with controlled collection and working towards some other solutions that could be, may initially have to be landfill facilities, but also the fact that the waste in many of the developing countries is very organic, very humid. But the organic waste would be quite suitable for alternate technologies to the landfill, which would be either composting, anaerobic digestion, or other treatment for organic waste.
That is interesting. So taking a whole perspective, that's interesting. So Nimmi, do you have anything to say about this, or we can go to the next question?
No, let's move on. So that way you can cover. I'm also fine with going a little longer in case people have questions.
Yeah. All right, that sounds good. Okay, and how does the carbon market affect the emission mitigation initiatives? I mean, is there a real effect, or how is it? How is it happening right now? What's happening right now? One of you.
I'm going to let Gary take the question because I'm not following the carbon market very closely.
Okay. Well, unfortunately, with I won't get into the detail, but there was a after 2012 really collapse of the carbon market. The European, the EU emission trading scheme is still up and running, but the prices have dropped considerably, and the CDM, the certified emission reduction prices have really come down to almost zero. So it's really unfortunate because that was in a way, at least through the CDM, the Clean Development Mechanism from the UNFCCC, was a mechanism that was getting a lot of projects registered. There were emission reductions happening on a project-by-project basis, and right now that's not possible. So there are some other mechanisms. The World Bank is looking at a funding mechanism for these projects, the CDM projects that are ready to go, but just because of the market are not able to continue with their investment in the implementation of the project. But what we do see, you know, what we're doing in terms of looking at these in the CCAC and elsewhere, what we see is there's some projects where it's looking to maybe start at a project level, but a way in which the project could be replicated and go broader, even regionally, nationally. And that's similar to what you see in the development of some of the nationally appropriate mitigation actions. So it's really looking to replicate and build on a national basis. And some of the there's ongoing discussions on working towards some type of funding mechanisms for these NAMAs, which would be larger scale, and also so there is discussions that are ongoing. The Green Climate Fund, which the board has been established for that fund, and that would be the fund that would be taking in the investment and the financing that had been promised in by the countries for dedicated for adaptation and mitigation. So that could actually be a stream later on for financing and funding some of these municipal solid waste projects as well.
That is interesting. Nimmi, do you have anything to add?
In terms of funding for these projects,
Yeah.
I do know that we are coming across projects, with especially composting projects, where there, and I think maybe this we can discuss later as well, but we find that sometimes there is not a market for the compost that is developed from the waste collected.
Right.
And I think when there was a good price in the carbon market, it didn't matter. But now it matters even more, the quality of compost that is improved for some of these projects to be financially viable.
That is interesting. Okay, so we're almost towards the end, and we have 4 more minutes. So where should resources and efforts be focused to mitigate methane and black carbon within waste management? I mean, and where should be most of the human and financial resources be invested to, you know, get to the short-term, near-term climate change mitigation?
Well, I think.
Go ahead, Gary. Okay, I'll start, and then Gary will probably have a lot of technical information.
Please. Go ahead.
Seeing all of the places that I've seen, I think one of the most important things is closing of the old dump sites. You know, in many of the developing countries' cities, we find that waste gets dumped sometimes, you know, it starts as a small dump, or even if they did have an old dump site, a planned dump site with a lifetime of maybe 20 years, and then you find that this is going on for about 40 years, 50 years, and it's not properly managed. So when it's just an open dump site, you have 2 different problems. You do have the methane generation.
Right.
And then you have the methane generation, it's easy also for fires to get started at the landfills. So you have like a dangerous situation. So it's not just the climate issue, you also have health and safety issues associated.
Right.
So in my opinion, like that, you know, moving away from open dumps to well-managed landfills, and sometimes it is hard to go from, you know, one extreme of open landfills to a sanitary landfill. And sometimes we find that they adopt the regulations of the US or Germany or something, and then it becomes impossible. Or when they have a transition away from open dumps to well-managed landfills. I think that's a very important thing. And then the other thing to reduce these emissions is a good collection system. Because if you had a good collection system, then you wouldn't have waste being thrown. And I will add to this that there's a fantastic example is Leo. Because I have pictures of CO from 10 years ago, and I use oftentimes in presentations where it was badly managed. They had an open dump site, and in the space of about 10, 15 years, they have done a fantastic job of closing and being able to extract gas from it, and then developing good sanitary landfills now.
That is interesting. We actually had a panel called Relevance of Landfills in Developing Countries recently, and the panelists mentioned that Latin America has been a wonderful example of how landfills are the rule of the land now. They have actually closed many open dump sites earlier, so that's quite interesting. Gary, would you like to take on that?
I would just kind of reinforce that. It's really the goal should be, as I said in the beginning, I think really really banning open burning of waste and moving away from that. And as Nimmi said, just really working up the waste hierarchy, really working towards coming up with solutions that are adapted locally, but also look at the fact that this is very organic waste, and as Nimmi mentioned before, looking to see if it's compost is produced with the right quality. There are many places that need that organic amendment to the soils, and it's really very useful, or it can be used as well for energy production. So there's a lot of benefits from using some of these alternatives, but it means really coming together with a global plan, an integrated waste management solution for a city, and then really seeking out the funding. For the funding, we really need to work to convince the investors that this is a really cost-effective solution, and one that has a number of benefits, really very strong benefits for health, the environment, but it can be done. The technologies exist. They're there, so they just need to be adapted to the local conditions, and the local teams need to be trained, and there's a lot of awareness and training that needs to go on for the public. But I think there's things that can be done, and it can have a significant impact and benefit for the climate.
Right, that's interesting. I actually want to ask a question about the investors. Considering that they have so many other priorities for investing, in what light do they see these kind of projects to invest in? What's their perspective?
I'll just say that I think that what you find, especially even in developed countries, some of these technologies, the investors view it as a high technical and operational risk with some of these projects, and some of them is because it's just new technology, other because it takes a long time for the projects to get approved. So they look at that. So what's really important is to have a real solid business plan, as we said earlier, which means you can really show that you have a guaranteed input, that the waste is there, it will make it to these facilities and infrastructure that's being where the finance is being sought, that there's also, if you have compost or other outputs, that there's real firm contracts and agreements to take those materials or the energy.
Right.
And then also just that the regulations that the whole facility will then be operating under are stable and clear, and there's less risk for the changes in regulations or any types of agreements that are financial or fiscal reasons are not fluctuating quite a bit. And to the best, I think that a lot of it takes really marketing of the fact that some of these technologies are proven technologies, even if they're not proven in the particular country.
That is interesting. And Nimmi, so before we get to concluding remarks, would you like to mention any topics that we haven't covered here relating to this subject?
Two very quick things. One is about organic waste management, and we find that the organic content of some of the waste in most cities is very high. So it's really important to look at composting and anaerobic digestion as an alternative to just putting it in the landfills, because it is a resource. And then we worry about the quality of the compost and a market for the compost. And one thing we're looking at is, even if you can't sell it, we should look at the cost of not taking it to the landfill And using this waste, the municipality can use it in its own projects. So, oftentimes you find very distressed trees in the median strips and on the side of the road. I mean, even the soil quality is so poor that even if the city were to use it, it would, that could be a use. And the other thing I want to mention is about recycling. We didn't spend too much time on it.
Yeah.
Recycling, but recycling is something that has gotten a lot of attention over the years. But in the hierarchy of waste management, as we move towards recycling, what we're finding is it's important because it's every one of these cities you have the informal sector recycling right at the landfill. And when we try to either go into the sanitary landfill system or try to often outright from the sector because there are many who lose their jobs.
That's right.
And so there we need to focus on how do you draw this population. So when the municipality has a recycling program, how do you set it up so you can pull them into being employed at these facilities?
Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, so Nimmi, I'll ask you to conclude after Gary. So Gary, do you have any concluding remarks? We'll end the panel.
No, I just realized that it's very hard to cover the full gamut of subjects we can talk about and really get into the level of detail, but it's been an interesting discussion. I think there's a lot to be done, and what I mean, we can really hope that in some of the cases, if we can get the financing and really move ahead, that perhaps even some of these countries that are really in very intermediate or lower technologies or solutions for waste management can leapfrog and actually go beyond and move to some of these advanced technologies faster than some of the developed countries did. And then by doing so, again, it's a significant reduction of greenhouse gas emissions and other environment and health benefits. So I think that would be really should be the focus and why we're really spending a lot of time trying to get that message out.
That is interesting. Thank you, Gary. Nimmi.
Yeah, what I would say is for the audience and for others to look at the Climate and Clean Air Coalition website and look at the Municipal Solid Waste Initiative. There's quite a few resources on that website that will enable municipalities, researchers to look at what is going on right now. And also on the ISFA website, there are a ton of resources to help municipalities. And there's quite a bit of discussion on the various stages of waste management, and getting involved really helps municipalities. They can learn from like cities, and I think that's one of the most useful resources, especially when you look at Rio, or when you look at how did China move away from throwing waste on the streets, all these different campaigns, what has worked, what hasn't worked, what are the barriers that other cities face. So I would point folks to the CCAC MSW site.
Thank you very much. Gary, did you have something to say?
Yeah, if I could just reinforce that. Thank you, Nimmi. That there are a number of interesting knowledge platforms and exchanges that are available. Notably, the CCAC Municipal Solid Waste Initiative has a platform that can be really good starting point to see what's going on, exchanges of best practices, and seeing what the cities are doing already that are in the program. And that links to other websites and other databases that are quite interesting, and also there's a possibility to ask an expert. There's webinars such as this one that are organized, so it is doing a lot to really try to spread the word, exchange, and give access to the key information that the cities need to understand what type of programs they could be involved in.
Sure, definitely. We have a question, but since it's late, I will actually send an email about that question to you, and maybe we'll put the response as an article later on. But with this, I think we can end the panel. I would like to thank everyone who watched it and asked questions, and thank you very much for the panelists for the precious time here. So yeah, with this, I would also like to remind you that there is another panel tomorrow on drivers and barriers for waste management in the developing world. And you can find more information about that in our calendar, and we'll look forward to seeing you there. Thank you very much.
Thanks for hosting.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.